Welcome, everyone. It's really exciting to have you here. I appreciate you making time to be with us today to talk about Student Wellness Ambassador resources and responses to COVID-19. I understand that we might have folks here who are ambassadors to the California Community College system, who are ambassadors other than Student Wellness Ambassadors, and I really appreciate everyone who's checking in with the chat box here. So good morning, Sin. Please do not hesitate to raise your hand if you have questions or comments that you'd like to bring up during this presentation. I'm hoping that this can be somewhat of an interactive discussion today. So briefly, I'll start off with our overview. We'll go over some norms or some agreements for us to make this webinar hopefully as beneficial to everyone as possible. Then we'll do some introductions, both of myself and of you all. Then we're going to talk about college student needs and the whole health approach within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we'll talk about some shelter-in-place outreach and engagement ideas, and I'd especially love to hear any ideas that you all have been coming up with. And then we're going to talk about wellness of our student wellness ambassadors, and if we have other types of ambassadors here, talking about those ambassadors' wellness as well, because caring for our caretakers is absolutely critical. We are all, of course, living through this distinct moment of public health crisis, and being able to be humans ourselves, first and foremost, enables us to then do a better job supporting others in whatever kind of ambassador role you might be in. And then finally, we'll conclude with some resources that I'm hoping might be helpful to you in the work that you do, the critical work that you do as ambassadors. I'd like to just say that this presentation, as you probably have picked up on, was initially created for the student wellness ambassadors, and additional ambassadors were welcome to join us. So we have adjusted some pieces in hopes that it might be relevant to other types of ambassadors, but that's another place where I really welcome raised hands and comments in the chat box so that we can make this as relevant as possible to everyone who is on this call. First of all, the norms. This is an idea of how we can make this space as useful to everyone as possible. The first idea is to create a virtual water cooler. That is, questions might be raised or comments might be raised that are really great topics for us to discuss, but unfortunately we only have an hour here today. So when that happens, we will throw some of those ideas and questions into our water cooler, which is actually our chat function, and then if there are resources that we can send to you after the webinar, we will do so. We will expect and accept a lack of closure. There is so much that we could be talking about today regarding COVID-19 and how best to support the students who are in the community college system of California, but we're not going to be able to get to everything. We will get to as much as is possible. I also want to share that you are most welcome to ask questions by unmuting yourself. So you have 3 ways that you can engage in the conversation. You may put something into the chat box, you may also raise your hand, or you can simply unmute yourself and just jump on in. I welcome all of it. To that point, we will ask for clarification as needed. So please do feel free to let me know if there's something that I say or somebody else says that needs a little bit more information to make sense. And finally, we will strive to avoid multitasking during this virtual learning space. It can be really tempting to answer emails or text or jump onto social media or what have you, but we only have 1 hour together, and so the extent to which we can stay focused here really will make this a better environment for everyone involved. I'm going to stop for a second and see if anyone else has norms that they'd like to throw out here to the group. If you do, if you go ahead and put them in the chat function, that would be great. So my name is Eliana Ramirez. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have worked the last 15 years in the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Palo Alto, so I see that Sin and I have been neighbors, as it were, as Sin is at De Anza Community College. Shout out to De Anza. At the VA, I worked with veterans who were living with severe and persistent mental illness and have, for the entirety of my career, really focused on the mental health of minority populations, so people of color, LGBTQ folks, women, and veterans. In addition, I have a background in research that has focused mostly on trauma, resilience, post-traumatic growth, and the minority stress model. And I'll be weaving in those concepts throughout our conversation today because I think that they're really pertinent to this moment that is highly, at least for everyone, pretty much difficult, and for some people can actually be relatively traumatizing. So whether it's having to isolate or shelter in place or having the experience of family members or friends becoming ill or themselves becoming ill with COVID-19 or anticipating that people might become ill, this can be very triggering for folks, and especially people who have histories of trauma can be triggered into a traumatic place as well. So that's some of what I hope to share with you, as well as bringing in some of my research in those areas into our conversation here as we consider the ways that we can best support students in the California Community College system. I'd like to move on to meeting all of you. And I really, again, appreciate that people have entered into the chat box your name, your college, and the ambassador program that you work with, if you, in fact, work with an ambassador program. You'll see that I have several pictures of amazing student wellness ambassador teams throughout these slides, which I have pulled from materials you all have submitted over the year. It is really, really exciting to meet you all, largely because my experience in college and universities and graduate school, I've really appreciated people who would step up like you all have to think about and be proactive to support the wellness of students. And so for that reason, it's really an honor for me to be with you all here. So we're going to start off with a poll to get to know us. The question is, what do you think are the greatest challenges that are facing students at this time? And if you just go ahead and enter your answers here, please, then we will be able to get a sense from our group what we think the greatest challenges are facing students at this time. The options are maintaining academic progress during shift to online learning, mental health challenges of isolation from shelter in place, and or stress and anxiety over COVID-19. Grief over lost major events like graduations or weddings. Difficulty balancing academic life with caring for children and or elderly family members. Financial stress from lost work. Food insecurity and or housing insecurity. And other. And if you have identified other, if you would please submit those ideas into the chat box and we can include them in our discussion here. I really appreciate the folks who are jumping in and answering responses. So far, it looks like the perception is that financial stress from lost work is one of the top concerns that are facing students at this time, followed by maintaining academic progress during shift to online learning, and mental health challenges of isolation from sheltering in place and or stress or anxiety over COVID-19. We also see some food insecurity and or housing insecurity as well. Okay, thank you everyone so much. So as we can see, there are a variety of different stressors that students are experiencing right now. What a big shift for people, right? For all of us, frankly, to suddenly have to shelter in place and to adjust. We have many students who are caretakers for children as well as for elderly parents or family members. And those of us who have children, they're at home. And so we're juggling not only, our jobs, if we're lucky enough to continue to be able to work remotely, or a lost job in the financial stress, as many of you noted there, plus taking care of children or elderly family members. And on top of that, the issues of trying to maintain academic progress. So I want to start off with this image. I don't know if you've seen this. I first saw this image on Facebook. This is an image by Caitlin Kurian. Caitlin created this image about the class of 2020, and I believe the image is in reaction to high school students who are about to graduate. But I thought that it was an image that really spoke potentially to college students as well. I think importantly about this image is that the person is holding the graduation piece and their academic progress at the same time that they're wearing the mask that is so quintessential, essentially, to the COVID-19, and that you can see the tears. But the person is also still making direct eye contact. And I think this image really spoke to me because what college students, what college faculty and administrators, and frankly all of us are doing right now is we're trying to adjust to a new normal. And the role of student wellness ambassadors I think is even more critical now than it ever has been in the past, because what you can do to support the students of your colleges is to help them maintain that ability to stay true north, that is to adjust and adapt to this new normal while still making progress toward their goals, their personal goals that they've worked so hard for. I want to stop for a second and just see if anyone else has any reflections on this image that they'd like to share. You're welcome to share any thoughts in the chat function or by unmuting yourself and jumping in. You're welcome to. I see one person is typing, and I guess I would also like to say from this, one thing that speaks to me from this image is that the image suggests to me a great deal of strength and determination as well as pain, and that in real life we can have both simultaneously. And I think that's part of what is so critical right now for those of us who support other people around their own health and wellness, is to be able to reflect that, yes, this is a very painful moment, and we are also presently surviving because we're here right now. Carly says, this is really powerful. I think it is important to not dismiss those feelings of pain and disappointment. Carly, I could not agree more. I think a lot of what I'm hearing from mental health clinicians, as well as from clients who are receiving mental health services, as well as students and teachers, academics in general, is that we all are both living as real human beings in the midst of a global pandemic, and we're trying to keep going in what we're doing. But in order for us to keep going, we have to be able to acknowledge the pain and the difficulty that we're feeling. I'm very interested in the student wellness ambassador position in terms of the peer support that you provide to one another. And this idea of, and we'll get into this a little bit more in this presentation, that how you use your own experience right now as a peer support person can be very powerful. I know as a clinician, I was trained to compartmentalize feelings so that I can be present to another person who is experiencing grief or sadness or anger or joy, any feelings that they're feeling. I think what's uniquely special about a peer specialist role is that you can use, if you're comfortable with it, your own experience right now to help normalize the experiences of other students. Adriana says, or Adriana, excuse me, I'm not sure if I'm mispronouncing. Adriana says, I appreciate this picture. I myself am a college student who is graduating this semester. And what it speaks to me is that it is a challenging time, but she also looks strong because she is looking straight towards this chaos. Adriana, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And the idea that we can both feel deep feelings and still move forward is, I think, absolutely essential. And from what I understand about community college students is that many students have overcome massive challenges to get to the community college in the first place and then to get through the community college system. And so I actually think that community college students have a lot of resilience that they've probably already developed before they started this academic year and well before COVID-19 actually started, that will serve them very well at this moment. And our ability to reflect back that strength, the community college system and students in particular, I think will be absolutely essential. I see that Sin is also typing something. I really do appreciate all of you who have been putting thoughts into this chat box here, and I can appreciate that there's a way in which many of you may not have met everyone else who's on the call, and so there's a certain vulnerability that people take a willingness to share in the chat box, and I really do appreciate it. While Sin is typing, I am going to invite people to think about the resources that are being shared at the end of this webinar today. These are resources that you can share in any way you deem useful. So if you decide that you want to do some sort of a virtual event because we're not able to do in-person events later this year, you might decide to share the resources in that virtual event. You might also decide that you would like to share them one-to-one if other students were to contact you directly. Oh, it looks like Sin has stopped typing. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. And please do feel free to keep communicating in the chat box. I do see that Sin said, the picture reminds me of how I thought about delaying my graduation and denying transfer admissions. I am not alone, as I recently talked to a classmate who felt the same way. This is a tough time for all of us, but I appreciate how this picture reminds me to not give up. Absolutely, Sin. And I think about this, again, that peer support role that you can play to be able to articulate that, what you just shared, to other students, I think will normalize their experience as well. And it's so powerful, to hear it from a peer versus to hear it from an administrator or a faculty or a family member say, oh, just keep going, just keep going. It's totally different, right, when we can hear it from somebody who's living that experience right next to us. I see Diane, she said, from the image I see resilience. She still sees hope and she is looking, striving forward. I couldn't agree more, Diane. And I'm so grateful. I wish that I could shake the hand of the artist just to say how much this image, I think, is resonating with many, many people at all different stages in academic life. So moving here to this slide around COVID-19 stressors and college students, some of the pieces that I wanted to elevate are that this is a hard time for everyone, and there might be certain student populations that are particularly challenged at this moment. So for example, we might think about students who are coming from low-income backgrounds. I saw an article recently that was talking about how COVID-19 and sheltering in place and then doing all of our courses online can really show the differences in access to resources because people can see around the person when they're on video what's going on behind them. Some people are living in environments where there are a lot of family members in a very small apartment, for example. And that information may not be readily available when we are in classes together. Some people may not have access to high-speed internet, or they might be sharing a computer with many people in a house. And therefore, it might be more challenging for them to make all of the online classes in the same way that somebody would who has a computer that's dedicated to just themselves or who does have access to high-speed internet or a room by themselves. Additionally, for students who access disability or accessibility services, this can be a particularly challenging time because, for example, some of the resources that are made available when people are at school are not necessarily available when they are working from home in their classes. As I mentioned previously, students who are juggling homeschooling of their children now, as well as their own academic progress, and students who are living with existing mental health challenges, we're starting to see in the literature an exacerbation of issues like anxiety, depression, suicidality, substance use and abuse as well. So for people who had existing mental health challenges prior to COVID-19, those challenges can become even more magnified now. Additionally, for folks who have just or are finishing their degree or program, they're about to enter a job market that is largely frozen in terms of global business. And that's a very different future to graduate into than what people had thought when they began this program. Many people might have concerns about paying student loans, going back to the poll that we just saw. This is a part of that speaks directly to that. I'm really excited to share that there are several student loan agencies that are allowing flexibility for students, and I've got some of those resources at the very end of this presentation. So I think that there's also a message of hope that we can bring to the community college student population. One is that there is some loan leeway that is being developed right now by many loan lenders. There's also a variety of mental health supports that are going online or becoming virtual, so people can also get support for many of the different challenges that they're facing anew in the age of COVID-19. Then finally on this slide, if the COVID-19 pandemic results in a recession, we might actually see increased suicide rates, domestic violence, crisis line calls, and reduced public health services as we have seen in previous recessions like the 2007-2008 recession here in the United States. So students are really juggling a lot right now, of course, in this moment. So I want to stop and just check in with you all. I know many of you have put together some really fabulous ideas for events that I've seen that were slated to be in April and May of this year. And I just wanted to check in with you about any events that you've had to cancel because of the shelter-in-place order. I know what I had seen was that Moreno Valley College's Pathway to Wellness event was planned for April 30th. And this is where students would have been handed stress kits that would include a stress ball, T-scantrons, and more. They would also be including therapy dogs or henna artists and a masseuse, and students would have the chance to relax and prepare for their finals. Oh my gosh, that is exactly the kind of wellness activity that I would have loved to have gone to when I was a college student. And of course, we cannot provide that level of support at this moment. I'm seeing Adriana was planning on doing a painting event. Excellent. And some of the images that I saw involve things like painting, and which we know to be very therapeutic and helpful to people who are managing stress. Finn says, had to cancel my mental health walk and May mental health event as well. I just want to acknowledge, having been a student organizer myself when I was in college, the massive amount of work and energy and heart and soul, frankly, that go into planning these beautiful events for the campus. When I was imagining asking you this question, it wasn't just about what you might have to be pivoting, what events you might have to pivot in this new normal that we're in, but also just a sense of loss for the time and energy that you put into it. So just want to acknowledge and affirm that that may not be for nothing, that we might still be able to salvage some of that energy. I also had read that San Bernardino was going to do an event called Chalk About It, which was a positive affirmations, life ambitions. This was going to be in April. And in Bakersfield, Cognito, there was going to be a Cognito challenge in May because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So just elevating that May is Mental Health Awareness Month might be a really great frame for any activities you might plan moving forward this year. Diane says that she misses the one-on-one interactions with community and collaboration in supporting events. Absolutely, Diane. My experience has been that every day I'm finding a different kind of place where I'm realizing a loss of connection to others or community. And I think one of the pieces that's so important is that right now what we're doing is physical distancing, but we don't actually have to do social distancing. And that's one of the messages that I'm hoping will come through this presentation today, is that there are ways that we can do physical distancing to keep ourselves and others as healthy as possible, but we don't have to do the social distancing. It does require us to do some thinking outside of the box. So thinking about time here, I just want to invite anyone to share the ideas. I've used some terms here so far already that we actually haven't clarified. What does it mean to cope? What does it mean to have wellness? And what does well-being mean? And you're welcome to, if you'd like, to share any of your thoughts about these terms in the chat box or to speak them out loud. Given kind of the time that we're at right now, and I want to make sure that I can get to the resources that I've prepared for you, I'll just share a couple of ideas that might resonate with some of you. So coping typically is around the idea of how we get through a really challenging moment. So we can get from before the challenging moment to through the challenging moment to after the challenging moment. Wellness oftentimes is thought about the extent to which our physical health or maybe even our mental health might be panning out for a given day, hour, or moment. And well-being oftentimes is connected to that idea of wellness, and oftentimes is around mental health. I see that someone is typing here, and I'm excited to see what they're sharing. I think these concepts of coping, wellness, and well-being also are culturally specific. So from our different experiences in life, be it from racial or ethnic experience, be it in terms of our gender or identity, it might have to do also with our definition of being a veteran or civilian, that these terms might mean very different things to different people. And when we think about the California Community College system, one of the beauties of it is the great diversity of the student body. And so I appreciate when in the work that you all do, as you engage the student body around these different kinds of concepts, that there might be very different definitions based on who you're speaking with at that time. Just as an example of this, having worked with veterans for many years, when I ask them about, well, what does it mean to cope? I oftentimes will ask them, what did that mean? What did that word mean prior to entering the military? What did it mean when you were in the military? And what did it mean after you were in the military? Again, because what's happening around us can make a very big difference in how we feel about what it means to cope well or to struggle. And with that, I'm going to move to the next slide. which is asking whether or not the meanings of these words have changed with COVID-19. And that's kind of what I was alluding to with my mention of veterans and their experiences. So I'll share just an example of this for myself. I'm the parent of a young 6.5-year-old. Prior to COVID-19, I had these wonderful goals, perhaps, or boundaries around screen time. And I really did not want my child to be on the screen too much. And so we really limited the amount of time that this person was on the screen. Well, gosh, now I have to allow my child to use more screen time because it's required for school. And so, you know, as I think about wellness, I have to readjust my thought about wellness and well-being for my child, because connection to other classmates, ability to access education, these are shifting right now and they require screen time. I'm seeing some really great messaging in here. Diane says, coping is something I am always learning. So true, Diane. There are different strategies and techniques that can help everyone. Wellness to me is nutrition and exercise. Well-being to me is practicing self-compassion and care. Brilliant, Diane. I'm so glad that you brought that up, this idea of self-compassion and care. I think this is part of what is so hard right now, is that many of us are feeling like we have to work faster and harder to accomplish goals in a new normal. And what that is requiring is working really, really long hours. And where in there are we able to practice self-compassion and care when we know that things like exercise really have an effect, beneficial effect on mental health, when we know that things like adequate sleep and social connection to others are directly tied to our ability to cope, our physical wellness, and our mental health well-being. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce this idea, if you haven't seen it before. This is from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Agency. This is 8 Dimensions of Wellness. And I really like this image. I hope that you can see it well. But it talks about 8 different aspects of our lives that all connect and overlap to create an overall sense of wellness. And so just looking at one topic, emotional wellness, this is in relation to our relationships to others, whether we feel confident, the extent to which we are resilient. And one thing I'd really like to share is that resilience is something that we can learn and we can develop over time. It's not that there are some people who are resilient and people who are not resilient. No, no, no. The plasticity of our brains have hardwired us to be able to develop resilience along our lifetime. And I think that's one of the pieces that's so critical for student wellness ambassadors as well, potentially to reflect back to the community, is that anyone can develop skills of resilience. And frankly, community college students probably already have developed a lot of resilience just to get to this point in the first place. But you can see that there are other dimensions here: financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, and environmental. And I think one of the pieces that's so important right now about COVID-19 and having to shelter in place, that as we've kind of talked about, many aspects of this wheel are being impacted. So for people who are Jewish, tonight is the beginning of Passover. And for many people, observing Passover by themselves in their homes is a deeply painful experience, because it's something that is an experience that they typically share with others in community. For people who are Christian, this coming weekend is Easter. Oftentimes, families will celebrate Easter by doing Easter egg hunts or going to church, both of which are oftentimes social community events. And so when we think about wellness right now for students, it can be helpful to think about how COVID-19 is largely impacting almost every single, if not every single aspect of this wheel. I wanted to share with you, and I'm not going to spend too much time going through all of the questions, but you've got them. You can download the slides for yourselves. These are some really, I think, powerful questions that have been created by a group called Meaning Makers that relate to the wheel that I just showed you. So these are questions that you might consider completing by yourself or with another wellness ambassador peer. These are also questions that you might share with students who are part of your college campus community. I like these questions because they are related to the 8 dimensions of wellness that we just looked at. I like them because they're strengths-based as well, meaning they are acknowledging that people have an incredible toolbox of resources and resiliencies of their own when we are in moments like this facing COVID-19, a global pandemic, it can be very easy to slip into moments where we feel like there is no sense of hope. And when we can step back and think about, well, how did I get through prior to this moment? What are some of the things that have helped me feel better in the past? Or how can I tell when my wellness is being affected? That can really help us to move forward in a very strategic way. I really like these ideas also around who I can reach out to for support and how we can reflect on what it's like to check in for ourselves. So again, these are questions that might be useful for you as a student wellness ambassador to go through on your own or with a peer. They also might be useful to share with the community college system. So here I'm going to get into some wellness coaching suggestions. As I just mentioned, I think this question is really powerful. What helped you to get through previous hard times? That can be a really energizing and, again, strengths-based positive way to both acknowledge that somebody is feeling very difficult feelings in this moment and to create a sense of hope. I think critically right now, attending to people's basic needs is absolutely essential. As you all identified in that poll, that we think that financial concerns are really, really high on the list. And of course, financial concerns will then relate to food, potentially insecurity, as well as housing, and other biopsychosocial wellness, meaning the wellness of our physical health, the wellness of our mental health, and the wellness of our relationships with others. Those can all be connected. So providing resources that are speaking to those basic needs can be very helpful. As I mentioned before, the idea of staying connected so that we can practice physical distancing but not social distancing. That we can identify self-help skills available even while we're sheltering in place. So you'll see in those lists of resources, for example, that there are plenty of 12-step recovery programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, Depression and Bipolar Anonymous, and other kinds of anonymous groups that are actually moving to an online platform. So people don't have to go to a physical fellowship where they're in a meeting with other people. They're actually doing them online now. And that we want to highlight our telehealth resources as well as crisis lines and warm lines. Additionally, it would be perhaps a helpful idea to reach out to the disability and accessibility services on college campuses to see what might be available now, and also the campus mental health agencies to figure out what resources are still available for students. And I think one of the critical pieces for students, for college students, is many have never done online classes. And so there are some really key basic skills like how to organize a workspace, how to organize one's calendar, how to maximize the platform of using online learning platforms. That these can be very helpful. And there is a webinar at the very end of this training or webinar that I wanted to share with you that you can find a lot of really great information that's specifically to help students adjust to learning from home. Adriana asked, do we have crisis lines for students that might not speak English? Absolutely, Adriana. I'm so glad that you brought that up. There are a variety of crisis lines now that have multilingual responders on the other end. So when you call in, you can be connected to somebody who speaks Spanish or Tagalog or any number of other languages. Thank you for bringing that up. Because, of course, we know that it's not just an issue of being able to speak to somebody in the language that is the first language of the caller, but also someone who has some understanding of the cultural experiences that the person's calling from within, right? And so that's such a critical question. Thank you, Adriana, for bringing it up. So now I want to get into some shelter-in-place student outreach and engagement ideas. These are just ideas that, when I was like, oh, let me go back in time to when I was a student organizer that I might have thought of doing now. I want to put out there to you all that I'm sure you have wonderful ideas that go way beyond what I've even thought of here. Just as an example, the one social media that I tend to use is Facebook. I do a little bit of Twitter, but I know that's really kind of old school now, and there are many other social media platforms that people are using. So this is not in any way meant to be an exhaustive list, but rather just to say, here's some potential places to think about starting. So for example, it's not just utilizing social media and email networks, but thinking differently about maybe reaching out to some of the student groups, so like MECHA, like the Black Student Alliance, like an LGBTQ student groups. If the mental health clinics at your campuses have listservs, faculty email distribution lists also might be helpful. Reaching out to the Academic Senate, Chancellor's Office, or even your college social media accounts for outreach. So the idea is, I'm imagining back in the day when I was organized on campus, oftentimes we would flyer the campus everywhere that we would go. We would stand in places where large groups of students would walk by at the same time. We might make announcements in class. So what I'm encouraging here is to think about who are those networks of people that have large audiences of students that you could go and essentially virtually flyer at this point. Another idea is to host online meetings. And our center has put together a virtual learning guide that we've received some really great feedback on it being helpful to people who have never hosted a virtual meeting or event before in their lives. I just wanted to share a couple of things that I've seen that are really exciting recently on social media. I've seen people doing virtual powwows. So this is where we've got people who will dance in a powwow, which if you're not familiar, are Native American gatherings where people from a variety of different tribes and nations would come together and dance in their traditional regalia. People are starting to do this on Facebook and through other social media platforms. So there might be ways to host events. I've also seen some LGBTQ communities who are doing drag performances online. So there are a variety of ways that especially we can build on the cultural strengths of different communities by bringing them to a community platform through virtual meetings. I think it's critically important, like we started off earlier, is to create an opportunity for people to be able to share their emotions and talk about the wide range of feelings that they're having right now. So talk about their grief, talk about their stress and anxiety, but also be able to reflect back to one another the strengths that they're seeing in themselves and others around them as well, and the resilience that we've talked about. You can also invite people to post videos that are answering questions, so for example, about self-help strategies, which could be placed on the Student Wellness Ambassador YouTube channel. And I thought perhaps organizing across college campuses throughout California might be a great way to do this as well. If you're familiar, there was the It Gets Better campaign that was created in the LGBT community where older LGBT adults would put videos of themselves telling younger LGBT people, it gets better, hang in there. And it really went viral. And so this might be another way to really build on and reflect back the strength and resilience of the community. You might invite people to create Spotify playlists or from any other platform that is about music sharing, specifically asking them to create inspirational themes like around hope, resilience, or better tomorrow. And these song playlists could be used for workouts at home or house cleaning or other things that people do while they're sheltering in place. You can also create Google Docs where students post pictures of themselves doing healthful activities and creating a photo montage to share on school social media. A lot of times people will create really great incentives for in-person events, and I'm just highlighting that there might be incentives that could be shared, and I don't know what your budgets are or if you have access to budgets, but if you did, perhaps this is one way that it could be shifted, is to think about things like Amazon cards. I also heard earlier that some people who are organizing webinar meetings are sending a little care package to the webinar attendees ahead of time. So if you have already bought stress balls or some other goodie that you were going to hand out at your in-person events, it might not be too late to use some of those. Maybe they could be shared. I think importantly, looking for opportunities to capitalize on everyday resilience. So these are things like laughter, hope, focusing on the now, reflecting on past coping successes, gratitude and altruism that is helping other people is really powerful, and that we can tap into things that are typically untapped potential alliances, like as I was sharing before, student groups that you may not have worked with before, but also faculty. And there might be some shared experiences between students and faculty that could work very powerfully together. For example, you as student wellness ambassadors are very interested in supporting the wellness of students. Many faculty are as well, and a lot of faculty might be concerned about seeing some of their students who came to class regularly who are not now getting online regularly. So there might be some natural alliances that you could have with faculty to try and figure out how to reach out to those students who may not be connecting quite as much as they did when things were in person. I think especially right now, a lot of us are concerned about the people who work in our agencies or our college campuses who we're just not sure how they're doing and what's going on with them because they might have been that first line of workers to have lost their jobs. So for example, janitors, people who work in food service, groundskeepers. I know that some of the really important relationships that I had when I was in school were with folks who did those kinds of work because that was the kind of work that my family did. So I would think about them, especially right now, do they have jobs and how are they doing? And to that end, it can be great to organize to support people who are the most vulnerable in our communities and perhaps creating group competitions or projects among students so that we can think about how when we give back to others, it helps our own sense of wellness and it helps our own sense of hope. That might be another kind of twist on this idea. So that in the past, your events might have been focused on supporting student wellness in the moment, like these great massages or a yoga class. Now, wellness is about maintaining connection to other human beings, and so creating an activity that they could support others on their college campus who might be most vulnerable right now. That's also, it's about psychological mental health, right, and wellness to be connected. So might think about fundraisers or clothing drives. So I want to do our second poll here. What are the challenges that are facing student ambassadors at this time, please? Options are maintaining their own educational goals, self-care and care of a family member or loved ones, fulfilling student wellness ambassador duties, or other. And if you have other, please do enter them into the chat pod. I think, when we think about caring for the caretakers, it's such a critical piece because those of us who are caretakers, we're really good at caretaking for others. And oftentimes, we'll be the last people to ask for support for ourselves, too. But it's that idea of we need to put our oxygen mask on first before we can help others around us, too. Wow, I knew you all would be a really important group of people who are really particularly gifted in terms of thinking about others. The fact that so many people now are saying that fulfilling their student wellness ambassador duties is the greatest challenge that they're facing at this moment in time is really profound to me because you have your own academic lives. You might have family or loved ones. You might also be dealing with financial concerns. You might also be dealing with a variety of other worries just related to COVID-19. And yet the student wellness ambassador duties is so prominent right now is really, really powerful. Thank you so much. I can see that you really take seriously this job that you're doing. And that is super impressive and powerful to see. So I want to take a moment to do what's called 4x4x4 box breathing. When I think about being a caretaker as a social worker and caring for myself, that was not something that was ever part of my training as a social worker, frankly. And I imagine that that's probably true for other mental health clinicians, be they psychologists or psychiatrists or marriage and family therapists. And it might also be true for you as student wellness ambassadors. So I want to stop and just share with you one of my favorite kind of self-care strategies because it's something that can be done anywhere at any time. And this is a skill that I actually learned from veterans. So I do want to give a shout out to veterans who have used this skill in the military, not only because it's important for me to give credit where credit's due, but also because this is a culturally specific piece that people might think, oh, well, veterans don't have, this might be too touchy-feely for them. But actually, I found that that's not the case. So I'm going to go ahead and invite everyone to please sit with your feet flat on the ground. Find a position so that your arms are comfortably supported. You may close your eyes if you feel like you want to, or you may keep your eyes open, whatever makes you feel safe and comfortable. And I'm going to invite you to follow directions and how to breathe for a second. So before we start, I'm just going to let you know, I'm going to count to 4 and ask you to slowly inhale during that count to 4. And I'm going to ask you to hold your breath for the count of 4. Then slowly exhale for the count of 4. And then again, hold it, no breath for the count of 4. And we'll do this a couple times together. So we'll go ahead and start now. So please take a deep inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slowly exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slowly inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slowly exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. Slowly inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slowly exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thank you. So you can open your eyes if your eyes were closed, or just kind of come back into this present moment. One of the reasons why I like to share this box breathing is, and again, the box is the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have a visual that you can do while you're doing the breathing to help you kind of get through it. I like to share this because it really does help with regulation, and it helps, meaning mood regulation. It helps us to get back to the present moment when we are being overwhelmed with fears about the future, when we are being dysregulated by difficult memories from the past. It can really bring us to center us now. It also is just helpful because the central nervous system, the relationship between the central nervous system and our moods and our physical health, the central nervous system is the kind of connector piece there. So when we slow down our breathing, it both makes us oftentimes feel physically better, but also can help our mood at the same time. I do want to acknowledge that Sin had shared we include all of the above options for this poll. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Sin, that I think for many people, all of the things in the previous poll might have been an issue for folks. Oh, Diane says, as a CalFresh student ambassador, I'm glad to tune in. Fabulous. I'm so glad to hear that. So I want to start moving over now in the last few moments that we have together to highlight some of the resources that I've put together for you that you might consider using in the field. Again, we've got in this presentation, there is a COVID-19 binder, and that is where you will find these resources plus many, many more. For the sake of these slides, I didn't want to show you all of the resources that we had because that would be a lot, just visually. It's not good etiquette for a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to share with you just a few select that are from this much larger body of resources for you. So there are crisis lines, warm lines, and chat rooms. Some of these you would phone call in, some of them are texting, some of them are online where you would go to a website and you can chat online. I've tried to find resources that are considering diversity issues, so parental stress lines, an LGBT national helpline. We are seeing that calls to domestic crisis lines are on the increase these days, and there are a variety of support groups that are available as well that are free or low cost. And those support groups are for a variety of mental health and physical health challenges. Staying physically active is really, really critical to mental health, and so I've got a variety of resources for you and the college campus system here that are free or reduced cost, classes that you can join online, classes for adults as well as for children, and then the recovery resources that I mentioned before. I think this is really, really critical because we are seeing some people are engaging more in substance use and abuse at this point. We've got resources around managing stress, anxiety, and staying connected. And then there are some places where people can hang out with their affinity groups. So there's a Queer Quarantine Hangouts Performances Facebook group that I mentioned before. And then the references here that I used for this presentation. And I just want to conclude by really thanking all of you for the critical work that you're doing. Just like I started out this presentation, your role as student wellness ambassadors is more important now than ever. And I really thank you for stepping up to this invitation to be there for your college campuses. And I wish all of you and your loved ones safety and wellness during this time.